In the bright and bustling city of Los Angeles, Sherry Rasmussen, a 29-year-old nursing supervisor, and her husband, John Rutan, a 30-year-old medical equipment sales representative, appear to have a perfect life. However, beneath the surface, a past affair would soon unravel everything. Sherry's former relationship with a man named Stephanie Lazarus, a 36-year-old police officer, would spark jealousy and betrayal, culminating in a crime that would change the course of their lives forever. What seemed like an ordinary marriage, in fact, held dark secrets tied to a jealous obsession. Before we dive into this case, we'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Let's get started. Sherry Rasmussen was born on February 7, 1957, in Arizona, to Nels and Loretta Rasmussen. The youngest of three daughters, Sherry was raised in a loving home where the values of compassion, integrity, and perseverance were instilled in her from a young age. Her family knew she was destined for greatness, as Sherry displayed a remarkable sense of intelligence and kindness. From the start, she was the kind of child who made an impact on everyone around her. Her teachers often praised her academic excellence, and she excelled in every aspect of her education. As she grew older, Sherry's natural ability to connect with others became more apparent. She had a caring heart and a keen interest in helping those around her, which led her to pursue a career in nursing. For Sherry, this was more than just a job, it was a calling. She wanted to make a difference, to heal, and to comfort people in their most vulnerable moments. This determination guided her to nursing school, where she quickly became known as a standout student. By her late 20s, Sherry had already made significant strides in her career. She worked as the director of critical care at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, one of the youngest individuals ever to hold such a position. In this role, she was responsible for overseeing a team of healthcare professionals and implementing life-saving procedures. Her colleagues respected her deeply, often commenting on her calm demeanor in high-pressure situations and her ability to make difficult decisions with ease. Beyond her professional achievements, Sherry was deeply loved by her family and friends. She was a devoted daughter, a loyal sister, and a cherished friend. Her warm, approachable nature made her a beloved figure in every circle she entered. Those who knew her described her as someone who made the world a better place just by being in it. In 1984, Sherry's personal life took a new turn when she met John Rutan, a UCLA graduate and mechanical engineer. They quickly became inseparable, and in 1985, they married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by their loved ones. Sherry and John seemed like the perfect couple, two intelligent, driven individuals with a bright future ahead of them. They moved into a quiet condo in Van Nuys, ready to build a life full of promise. The world seemed full of endless possibilities for them. The initial days of John and Sherry's marriage seemed perfect. They were in love, happy, and optimistic about their future together. Sherry had a fulfilling career as a nurse, and John was a successful businessman. Together, they shared dreams of a beautiful family, a life full of adventures, and building a future filled with joy. However, beneath this seemingly perfect facade, an obsessive and dangerous undercurrent was quietly brewing, one that would shatter their world forever. Stephanie Lazarus, John's ex-girlfriend, had never truly moved on from their past relationship. After their breakup years earlier, Stephanie continued to harbor deep feelings for John. But it wasn't just longing, it became an unhealthy obsession. She could not bear the thought of John marrying someone else, especially someone as perfect as Sherry. Stephanie had been in law enforcement for years, serving as an officer with the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD. Her training and position gave her access to resources and knowledge that made her an even more formidable and dangerous opponent. As an officer, Stephanie was well versed in surveillance techniques and had the ability to gather information without raising suspicion. But her obsession with John went far beyond what could be explained by lingering feelings. It became personal, consuming every aspect of her life. 4 years after their breakup, Stephanie never really let go of John. She kept tabs on his life, constantly seeking information about him and his relationships. As John's marriage to Sherry grew stronger, Stephanie's resentment and jealousy grew. She was no longer just upset about the breakup, she was angry, and the anger evolved into an obsession. Stephanie believed that John was her soulmate, and the thought of him being with another woman was unbearable. Sherry, on the other hand, had no idea of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She was focused on her marriage and her career, blissfully unaware of the dangerous force that was stalking her every move. She had no reason to believe that anyone could pose a threat to her perfect life. But Stephanie's obsession had already spiraled to dangerous levels. At first, Stephanie's actions were subtle. She would find out where John and Sherry were spending their time, showing up at locations where they would be. Stephanie began leaving John strange, cryptic messages, sometimes through mutual friends, sometimes through direct contact, attempting to insinuate herself back into his life. She refused to let go of the idea that she could still have him, even though he had moved on long ago. As time went on, Stephanie's fixation became more erratic and obsessive. She began following Sherry's movements, learning her routines, and watching her every step. Sherry began to notice that something wasn't quite right. She felt a growing unease, as if she was being watched. There were moments when she would spot unfamiliar cars parked outside their house, or sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of someone watching her from a distance. It wasn't until much later that Sherry would realize just how dangerous the woman who had been stalking her was. John, though, was largely oblivious to the full extent of Stephanie's obsession. He noticed the odd messages and some of the strange behaviors, but he brushed them off, convinced that his ex-girlfriend was simply unable to move on. He didn't realize that Stephanie's obsession was becoming something far more sinister. As the months passed, the obsession deepened, and Stephanie's desire to reclaim John and remove Sherry from his life turned into a dangerous, obsessive mission. Sherry's suspicions grew, but she never imagined that the real danger was closer than she could have ever realized. She couldn't fathom the level of obsession that Stephanie had reached. Her own sense of safety was about to be violently shattered by a person who was once part of her husband's past. The obsession had transformed into something much darker than Sherry could have ever imagined. Stephanie's jealousy and anger consumed her thoughts, and the line between reality and obsession blurred. It was no longer just about John. This was about reclaiming control. Sherry had unknowingly become the target of a woman whose past rejection had morphed into something far more dangerous. And as the obsession grew, so did the length Stephanie was willing to go to. Stephanie had not just been watching Sherry from a distance. She had been planning. The walls that separated them from each other were about to collapse, and the consequences would be deadly. Stephanie was about to take matters into her own hands, and no one, not even Sherry, would be prepared for what was coming. The morning of February 24, 1986, began like any other for Sherry Rasmussen. A 29-year-old woman with a promising future, Sherry had recently married John Rutten, a man she had known and loved for years. The couple had settled into a home in the San Fernando Valley, a quiet suburb of Los Angeles, where they hoped to build a life together. However, that morning would not end as expected. It would mark the beginning of a tragedy that would change their lives, and the lives of those who loved Sherry, forever. As Sherry's day unfolded, something far more sinister was brewing. At approximately 10 a.m., Sherry was found dead in her home, in what appeared to be a brutal and targeted attack. Her body was discovered by John Rutten, who had arrived home after working an early shift. Upon entering the home, he immediately found the horrific scene. Sherry's lifeless body lay in the living room, a gunshot wound to her chest, and signs of a violent struggle in the surrounding area. The scene was chilling in its clarity. This was not a random crime. The lack of forced entry suggested that Sherry knew her killer, and the way she was found indicated that she had been murdered in a moment of rage or deep personal animosity. There was no sign of burglary or robbery. Nothing was stolen from the home. It became clear that Sherry had been the intended victim. Someone had specifically sought her out, and the crime seemed to be committed with an unsettling level of purpose. At first, the police leaned toward the idea that the crime was a robbery gone wrong. The fact that there was no forced entry into the house suggested that Sherry may have let the killer in, but the lack of any items taken from the house made this theory increasingly unlikely. Investigators also found no fingerprints or other physical evidence that could definitively point to the killer. The case quickly became one of confusion and frustration for the Los Angeles Police Department, as they struggled to find any clear leads. The murder of Sherry Rasmussen left her family shattered, but no one fought harder for justice than her father, Nels Rasmussen. A retired police officer with decades of experience, Nels refused to believe that Sherry's death was simply another unsolved case. Determined to find answers, he took it upon himself to pursue leads and uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. The investigation initially followed the theory of a botched robbery, but as Nels, with his law enforcement background, scrutinized the evidence, he quickly recognized that something was off. There was no forced entry into the home, and the way Sherry's body was positioned suggested she had been targeted, not just an innocent victim of crime. Nels believed the truth was closer to home, and his instincts led him to suspect Sherry's new husband, John, and his past relationship with a woman named Stephanie Lazarus. Nels was aware of the long history between John and Stephanie, an ex-girlfriend who had never truly let go. This was the lead Nels began to follow, suspecting that Stephanie's jealousy and inability to move on from John could have played a role in Sherry's death. He dug deeper, finding out more about the relationship between Stephanie and John, and grew increasingly convinced that Stephanie was somehow involved. Despite his suspicions, the investigation made little headway. With her connections in law enforcement, Stephanie Lazarus seemed to be able to escape scrutiny. Nels, however, refused to give up. His years of experience told him that the case wasn't closed. He pressed forward, even when others, including some officers in the department, dismissed his concerns. They suggested that his grief was clouding his judgment, but Nels knew he was right. His daughter's death had to be solved, and he wasn't going to stop until it was. For years, Nels's search for justice led to dead ends. But in 2009, after more than 2 decades of fighting, new DNA technology gave the case the breakthrough it desperately needed. Forensic tests on evidence collected from Sherry's crime scene led to a match with Stephanie Lazarus's DNA. It was a shocking confirmation of Nels's long-held belief that Stephanie was the murderer. In 2009, after years of pushing for answers, Stephanie Lazarus was arrested. The case was finally solved, and justice was served. Stephanie was convicted of Sherry's murder, and in 2012, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though the verdict brought a sense of relief, Nels could never fully heal from the loss of his daughter. His victory was a bittersweet one. Sherry was gone, but her murderer was held accountable. Nels's fight for justice became a testament to a father's love and determination. He proved that even in the face of indifference and obstacles, a father's devotion could bring the truth to light. His unwavering pursuit of justice for his daughter ensured that Sherry's story would never be forgotten, and that her killer would pay for the crime. The murder of Sherry Rasmussen had been a baffling case for over a decade. Despite numerous efforts to find the killer, the investigation remained stagnant, and the crime seemed destined to remain unsolved. However, a breakthrough was on the horizon, and it would come in a way no one could have predicted, through the power of DNA. In the years following Sherry's brutal murder in 1986, the case had gone cold. Early investigations led nowhere, and no suspect had been identified. The possibility of a burglary gone wrong was initially considered, but the absence of stolen items made this theory unlikely. Another theory that Sherry had been targeted by a jealous lover or personal enemy also failed to provide any answers. As time passed, the case faded from the public eye, and the investigation stalled. However, forensic science was about to change the course of the investigation. By the mid-1990s, DNA testing was becoming a more reliable tool in criminal investigations, offering the hope of solving cases that had remained unsolved for years. In 1998, more than a decade after Sherry's death, the LAPD made a pivotal decision. They would revisit the case and reanalyze the evidence, especially the blood samples that had been collected at the scene but never fully tested. This decision would prove to be the turning point. The blood samples collected from Sherry's home had initially been set aside as the case grew cold. But when the DNA evidence was tested using newer, more advanced techniques, a shocking revelation emerged. The DNA found at the scene did not belong to Sherry, but to another woman. Investigators were stunned to discover that the DNA matched Stephanie Lazarus, a former LAPD officer who had once been involved with Sherry's husband, John Rutten. The discovery was nothing short of a bombshell. Lazarus had been a prime suspect early on, given her obsessive and jealous nature towards Sherry. She had never fully accepted John's relationship with Sherry, and many believed her jealousy had driven her to commit the murder. However, without any concrete evidence to link her to the crime, she had remained a free woman for over a decade, even continuing to work as an officer in the LAPD. Now, with the DNA evidence placing Lazarus at the crime scene, investigators had the smoking gun they needed. Stephanie Lazarus's involvement in Sherry's murder seemed unimaginable at first. How could a police officer, someone sworn to uphold the law, be capable of such a heinous act? But the evidence didn't lie. Lazarus's jealousy had fueled her obsession with John Rutten, and when she couldn't bear the thought of losing him to Sherry, she snapped. The DNA breakthrough not only solved the case but also exposed Lazarus as a cold-blooded killer who had successfully evaded justice for years. With the DNA evidence in hand, authorities were able to arrest Lazarus, and in 2009, she was convicted of first-degree murder. The long wait for justice was finally over, and Sherry's family, who had been left in limbo for years, could now mourn her loss with the comfort of knowing the truth. The DNA breakthrough in the Sherry Rasmussen case was a testament to the power of forensic science in solving cold cases. It also highlighted the importance of never giving up, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Thanks to modern forensic techniques, a long unsolved murder was finally brought to justice. In 2012, after over 2 decades of uncertainty, the case of Sherry Rasmussen's murder was finally brought to trial. The long-awaited moment would not only reveal the identity of the killer but also expose the corruption within the very institution that was meant to uphold justice. Stephanie Lazarus, a former LAPD officer. Her trial captivated the public's attention, as a police officer, once trusted to serve and protect, was now facing charges for the brutal murder of an innocent woman. The trial was built around crucial DNA evidence that had been overlooked for years. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives had failed to link Lazarus to the crime scene, even though she was a primary suspect. However, the breakthrough came when new DNA testing technology allowed investigators to match Lazarus's DNA to the sample found on Sherry's body. This moment would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, cementing Lazarus's guilt in the eyes of the law. The prosecution painted a compelling narrative of jealousy, obsession, and rage. Stephanie Lazarus had been emotionally involved with John Rutten, Sherry's husband, long before he married Sherry. Despite their breakup, Lazarus was unable to move on from her feelings for John. The prosecution argued that this obsessive jealousy was the driving force behind the murder. In their view, Lazarus's inability to accept the end of her relationship with John had boiled over into violence, culminating in Sherry's death. Lazarus's emotional attachment to John was presented as a clear motive for the murder. In contrast, Lazarus's defense team sought to cast doubt on the DNA evidence. They argued that the DNA recovered from the crime scene might have been contaminated or could have been planted. Lazarus herself testified, maintaining her innocence and denying any involvement in Sherry's murder. She claimed that she had no reason to harm Sherry, and suggested that the DNA was merely circumstantial evidence that should not be used to convict her. Despite these defenses, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence linking Lazarus to the crime. In addition to the DNA, investigators uncovered Lazarus's actions in the years after Sherry's death, which included deceptive behavior and attempts to deflect suspicion. Witnesses testified about Lazarus's jealous and obsessive tendencies toward John and how those emotions had likely led to a confrontation with Sherry that ended in murder. The prosecution argued that Lazarus's behavior showed a clear motive, one fueled by an intense and uncontrollable rage. As the trial progressed, the tension was palpable. The jury deliberated carefully, and in the end, Stephanie Lazarus was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict brought a sense of relief and closure to Sherry's family, who had spent years fighting for justice. Finally, Sherry's death had been acknowledged and punished. Lazarus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction served as a reminder that justice, though delayed, can still be served, no matter how long it takes. It also highlighted the dangers of unchecked jealousy and obsession, how they can destroy lives, even leading a trusted member of society to commit an unthinkable act. The case of Sherry Rasmussen would never be forgotten, and Stephanie Lazarus's conviction became a symbol of justice prevailing against the odds. For Sherry's family, the verdict brought some closure, but the pain of losing her would never fade. Sherry Rasmussen was a bright light extinguished far too soon. Her story is a tragic reminder of the devastating consequences of jealousy and obsession. Today, her case stands as a testament to the importance of perseverance and the relentless pursuit of justice. Though it took 23 years, the truth finally came to light, ensuring that Sherry's memory would never be forgotten. Let us know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.